Okay, 1, 2, 3. Are real DC fans just MCU fans in disguise? Debunking criticisms of Zack Snyder's DC films. In recent years, the debate over Zack Snyder's DC films, specifically Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League has continued to be a huge topic among fans of the DC Comics universe. Many critics and self-proclaimed real DC fans have been very vocal in their criticism of these films, often claiming that they do not represent the true spirit of the DC Comics characters. However, a closer examination of these criticisms reveals that many of these so-called real DC fans are actually Marvel Cinematic Universe fans, which many of whom never read a comic, neither DC or even Marvel, and their criticisms of Snyder's films are rooted in their preference for the Marvel brand. Hey, Kevin here and welcome back to Geeking Around. I'm filling in for Lewis Michael once again. If you're a fan of Zack Snyder and his Snyderverse, check out our playlist about the director and the DCEU. One of the most common criticisms levied against Snyder's films is that they are too dark and gritty, and do not capture the hopeful and optimistic tone of the DC Comics universe. While it is true that Snyder's films do have a darker tone than some of the more lighthearted Marvel films, this criticism is often exaggerated and oversimplified. Zack Snyder's original plan was to have a more hopeful Superman before he has succumbed to the anti-life equation. It is also worth noting that the DC Comics universe has a long history of darker and more mature stories, such as The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen, which Snyder himself has cited as inspirations for his films and directed the latest movie adaptation. Another common criticism of Snyder's films is that they are overly reliant on spectacle and action, and lack the depth and character development of the Marvel films. While it is true that Snyder's films are very visually impressive and feature some intense action scenes, this criticism ignores the fact that Snyder has also made a concerted effort to explore the emotional and psychological depth of his characters. Both Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League feature complex character arcs and explore themes such as identity, loss, and the nature of heroism. Typically, when an MCU fan claims a movie is emotional, that usually means it was simply funny. However, what is perhaps most revealing about the criticisms of Snyder's films is the attitude of the so-called real DC fans towards the newer DC films that have followed in their wake, such as Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and Shazam. These films have been generally well received by audiences and critics alike, and have done a lot to rehabilitate the image of the DC Comics universe on the big screen. However, many of the same critics who derided Snyder's films for being too dark and bleak have also criticized these newer films as well as recent MCU movies for being too light and formulaic. Furthermore, these critics have been quick to blame Snyder fans for not supporting the newer DC films, even going so far as to accuse them of being a loud vocal minority. However, the evidence suggests that the opposite is true. Snyder fans have been some of the most dedicated and passionate supporters of the DC Comics universe, and have been very vocal in their support of the newer films as well. Meanwhile, the so-called real DC fans who criticize Snyder's films have been conspicuously absent from the box office, with many of them having no real interest in the movies that Warner Brothers and DC made to pander to them. The so-called real DC fans spend more of their time attacking Zack Snyder, his movies, and his fans than supporting DC movies. The conversation surrounding Zack Snyder's DC films, particularly Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League, is a fascinating and multi-layered one, with compelling arguments for restoring the Snyderverse. It's worth noting that many criticisms of these films stem from a preference for the Marvel Cinematic Universe rather than a genuine passion for DC Comics. It's essential to recognize that Snyder's contributions to the DC Comics canon are significant, and have cultivated an enthusiastic fandom. True DC fans should celebrate the diversity of storytelling and styles that the universe offers without resorting to brand loyalty or petty tribalism. So what do you think? Are the so-called real DC fans nothing more than just MCU fans? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and hit that bell button for more videos. And check out our playlist for all things Snyderverse, DCEU and DCU. Check out all the cool links in the description, like Geeking Around Network, where you can find even more content. Geeking Around merch at Teespring for t-shirts, hoodies, and more. If you like to support the channel, become a Patreon and get members-only perks. Also check out Lewis Michael Comics Kira, a Star Wars story in Castle Lugbers. If you like to follow Lewis Michael, look for him on Twitter, link is in the description. This has been Kevin, and as always I'll see you next time. Bye.